Welcome, this is Peter Vickesland with Fundamentals of Public Health Engineering. In this video, we're going to think about and discuss sanitation. To get started, I want to go back to the first week of class, and we can think about the public health engineering cycles. And essentially, if we start up here at the top with humans, we're going to have excrement, waste material that's going to go into a sanitary sewer. It's then going to be taken to a wastewater treatment plant where it's going to undergo sedimentation, biological treatment, disinfection, and then there's going to be an effluent that's discharged. That's going to go into a surface water, typically, which will contribute to groundwater. All of this is going to be impacted by natural and anthropogenic hazards. Then there will be a drinking water treatment plant. That water goes out in a distribution system and then gets used again by humans. So this is the cycle that we have for more developed parts of the world. And that contrasts with what we have for lesser developed regions, where essentially we have waste material that goes directly out into the environment, and then maybe there's on-site treatment, maybe there's not, and we then have discharged effluent from that on-site treatment, if we're talking about a septic system or something on a localized basis. Or we might have just direct discharge, so a straight pipe that goes directly into ground or surface water. And those are going to be impacted again by natural and anthropogenic hazards. And then we may not have any drinking water treatment whatsoever. So the cycle is very short, and there's greater potential for human exposure to waste materials as well as the organisms that are present within that waste. Now, the definition for sanitation is the use of measures that create and maintain a healthy environment. And that's going to include both proper sewage as well as excretion disposal. It's going to be including the safeguarding of food and water. So we've talked about that previously in class. And it's going to be the control of disease-carrying insects and animals. So essentially pest control, vector control kinds of approaches. As part of their Sustainable Development Goals, the UN has put out lots of information trying to think about different types of sanitation challenges and then some solutions. And this is just an infographic that kind of goes through that, where we've got unsafe water, inadequate sanitation, insufficient hygiene, all collectively kill 3.5 million people per year. So if we stop dumping chemicals and waste in the environment, we invest in sanitation, we raise awareness of how important good hygiene is, that's going to be a good solution. We need to think about wastewater treatment. 80% of wastewater enters in the environment untreated across the world. So we need to get that better under control. If we do that, we'll protect natural resources and avoid water pollution. And then we need to be thinking about water availability. So water scarcity is a real issue for many people, because in this case, they say that it affects greater than 40% of the global population. So all of these things that are on this slide are things that we need to be thinking about. We can think about the factors that are responsible for controlling waterborne, foodborne, and intestinal diseases. This is going to include proper treatment and disposal of waste, the provision of potable water, food protection, and personal hygiene. And we've been thinking about these kinds of issues literally since the dawn of society across the globe. So this is an image of a latrine in the city of Knossos in Crete. And essentially there's a mechanism for flushing, there's a wooden seat. All of these things were put in place way back in 1700 BC. And you can even still see some of these today. This is an image from Knossos today. If you're interested about latrines and the history of them, you can actually go and look at this book, Sanitation, Latrines, and Intestinal Parasites in Past Populations. Goes through all kinds of different places across the world. This is actually just a map of the sewage and drainage system of Knossos beneath the domestic quarter. And again, you can see exactly how great this system was and how they had really thought through all of what needed to be done to move waste materials, so excreta, away from the people within the city. And within that same book, you can even go further back. You can go to Mesopotamia in the 4th and the 3rd century BC, and you can see pictures of cylindrical pit toilets built way back then. So we've been thinking about sanitation for a very, very long time across the planet. Now, there's all kinds of efforts across the planet trying to think about sanitation. This is one from South Africa, and this is just illustrating problems. So, open defecation, pit latrines, open dumping of sewage. All of these are things that you can then have kids go and play in these areas. They're going to then get sick with illness. So, from that same pamphlet, these are the solutions. So you've got a toilet where you have somebody that actually comes and collects the waste material on a periodic basis, or you have a sewage system. You have sewers that actually move waste material away from a toilet, and then you have piped water. All of these are solutions to some of these issues on the previous slide. Now we think about this across the world. So this is a article from a couple of years ago thinking about the relationship between toilet use and society in India. And essentially, 1 billion people in the developing world currently head out to an open field, the bushes, or some body of water to defecate. So we need to get that under control so that people don't get exposed to that. But that's a challenge in many places. And this is just an example in India where there's many people that actually have access to hygienic latrines still prefer open defecation. So they prefer to go outside. And so some of this has to do with just culture, has to do with religion. All of these are things that have to be thought through if we want to address this problem. A couple of definitions. So excretia, this is going to be waste matter that's eliminated for the body. And it's going to be a collective term for two things. It's going to be a collective term for feces, which is solid material. And it's also going to be incorporating urine. So feces, each and every one of us produces 27 grams per day on a dry basis. So if you dry it out, you get 27 grams per day. That 27 grams is literally packed with bacteria. There's something like 400 billion E. coli cells within that 27 grams. So that is a lot of bacteria that could make us sick. So we have to make sure that we separate that from water support sources and other things. And then urine is reasonably sterile, but it can contain some pathogens. To put some of this in perspective, essentially across the world between 1980 and 2015, we had 63,000 people that died from natural disasters, 75,000 that died from conflicts, and 780,000 that died due to unsafe water. So that's clearly a global issue that's much bigger than some of the other things that we spend a lot of time thinking about. And across the bottom of this diagram are essentially different ways that you can get polluted water in the environment. So you've got sewage discharges to surface water, groundwater pollution, and so on. And effectively what we can see is that depending on where we are, if we are in South Asia, East Pacific Asia, you have roughly 85%, 90% of the people have access to clean drinking water, but only 60% have access to basic sanitation. And that varies across the planet. So one of the goals of the Sustainable Development Goals is really to move sanitation forward so that we have much higher coverage across the world. And we could think about this in terms of a tiered structure, where effectively we go from open defecation, which would be the worst, up to safely managed. And essentially, we go open defecation is the disposal of human feces in fields, forests, bushes, open bodies of water. Unimproved would be a pit latrine that does not have a slab or a platform, a hanging latrine or a bucket latrine. Limited would be where you have shared facilities between two or more households. Basic are facilities that are not shared. And then safely managed are improved facilities that are not shared with others and where excreta are safely disposed of in situ or transported and treated off-site. So essentially, this is where ideally we want to get. But all of this falls within kind of the umbrella of basic service. If we go across the planet, essentially 39% of the global population uses a safely managed sanitation service. So the remainder are either going to be basic, which is 29%, limited, which is 8%, unimproved, which is 12%, and then complete open defecation is 12%. So very large numbers of people that need to be brought into using safely managed, basic, limited services instead of unimproved or open defecation. But again, the pattern varies depending on where you are within the world. So things are quite a bit better in North America and Europe than they are in Latin America and the Caribbean, as we might expect. And they're even much better there than they are in sub-Saharan Africa or Central Asia and Southern Asia. So again, location matters in terms of how well people are doing at achieving this goal in terms of sanitation practice. So I do want to note that we're improving. So if we had looked at these numbers from 10 years ago, 15 years ago, the numbers would have been much worse. So we've achieved over 75% coverage with basic sanitation services, but there's still lots of places that we have to be thinking about getting better. So sub-Saharan Africa in particular, India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, all are places where there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. One interesting fact, though, is that out of this world's 7 billion people, and we're getting closer to 8 right now, but essentially 6 billion of those 7 have access to a cell phone. But unfortunately, only 4.5 billion have access to a latrine or a toilet. So there's some issues here, clearly, in terms of what people value. To explain why we care, this is just a table that's actually quite a few years old now, but looking at morbidity and mortality of diseases related to poor environmental sanitation. So diarrheal diseases, including dysentery, typhoid, dengue, and so on. If we look at these, unsanitary excretia disposal, exposure to human excretia, food contaminated by human excretia, all of these, maybe not all, most of these that are on here are related in one way or another to exposure to excretia that got where it shouldn't be. And this just continues on this next page. So again, we have contaminated by human feces, human fecal matter. All of these are things that we can do better at. Now, if we go look at urine, we go look at feces, we go look at sullage, which is going to be other stuff that's in waste streams that is not excretia, is not urine. And essentially within all of these, particularly in feces, we see lots of different bacteria, we see lots of viruses. All of these are things that can spread disease and make people sick.